welcome to another video episode of my podcast. My name is Cheryl, and this is Cappuccino Crafts, my little channel on YouTube and my corner of the general interwebs. And today is no crafting because it's a special episode all about 2021 reading stats and reading review. So we are here to look at the year in reading that just passed, and for me it was a good year, and I think you'll see that as I review my reads, and you'll see so many things that I loved, and I hope that you had a great reading year. I hope that reading was good to you too, and that you found some new favorite books. I sure did. So let's begin with a little comparison. I did a little stats side by side. For the last 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, I kept a spreadsheet for each year, and I already have a spreadsheet set up and started for 2022. I plan to continue doing that as long as it works for me, as long as I feel like doing it. And so I thought I would look at some of the stats from my spreadsheets the last couple of years, and also compare my Storygraph stats for my all-time reading. Now, my all-time reading in Storygraph is not comprehensive every single book I've read in my life, because a lot of the books that I've read in my life many years ago, a lot of them I have forgotten, and some of them I kind of remember, but I don't really care about them, and I didn't feel like cataloging them in my online reading records. So if it wasn't a book that I might remember, but it wasn't important or it didn't stand out to me, I didn't want to remember it and catalog it. So that is a disclaimer for the all-time stats. But here we go. So I wanted to look at, this is what I wanted to compare. What were my top 3 genres all time, according to Storygraph? And from my spreadsheets, my top 3 genres in 2020 and 2021. I wanted to see, how they were different, how they were the same, and if there were any interesting trends. So for all time, my top 3 genres were: number 1, fantasy; number 2, classics; and number 3, historical fiction. And that sounds pretty representative from what I remember and what have been important things in my reading life. And especially some of the classics were read for school, absolutely. And some of the classics I read by myself. I still like to read some classics. I read at least one classic in 2021. And so, yeah. And in fantasy, my percentage all time, according to Storygraph, which again, not comprehensive, my fantasy percentage was 35%. So that is a big chunk. That's a big chunk. And I have always loved fantasy. I've always loved fairy tales and fantastical stories all of my life. So that totally fits. And classics, the percentage all time is 25%. And historical fiction, all time on Storygraph, is 22%. So my top 3 genres really cover a large majority of my reading. Now, in 2020 and 2021, my top 3 genres were the same in both of those years and in the same order. So we're going to look at 2020 and 2021 together, and we'll go top genre, second genre, third genre. My top genre the last 2 years has been science fiction, which is another love. I did dabble in science fiction earlier in my life, but it was never compared to fantasy for me. But I have grown a deeper love of sci-fi, and that is reflected in my current day reading. In 2020, I read 32 books total, and 22% of those were sci-fi. And in 2021, I read more books that year. I read 61 books in 2021, and 33% of those were sci-fi. So the number of sci-fi books went up, and also just the overall percentage compared to what other books I was reading. My sci-fi reading is definitely on an upward trajectory. And I'm not sad about it at all. I'm really enjoying it. My second genre the last 2 years has been fantasy. Not a surprise. We didn't think it was going to disappear from the top 3. In 2020, 19% of the books that I read were fantasy, and in 2021, 28% of the books that I read were fantasy. So, sci-fi and fantasy are pretty close. They are pretty close. But sci-fi is edging out these days. And then the third genre the last 2 years has been romance. And that's just romance in general. Now, there are many subgenres in romance. I have not separated out the romance by subgenre. So these are all just category romance. Some historical, some speculative, some contemporary, but all romance. In 2020, 16% of the books that I read were romance, and in 2021, 18% of the books that I read were romance. So romance is definitely a good step behind the science fiction and fantasy. But it's a lot more romance, I think, than I was reading definitely before. I have not all of my life really been a romance reader, and I'm still not a primarily romance reader, but I do enjoy it sometimes, and I have learned that I enjoy it more than I thought I would when I wouldn't read it at all, because there were many years when I wouldn't read any romance at all because I just was convinced it was not for me. But I have found that it is for me, and I do enjoy some romance of different kinds. Like I said, different subgenres. So, an interesting note, and I wrote it down here. This is in my bullet journal. I made a spread for my reading review. I wanted to keep all my notes of interesting reading information. For all time, so we're going back to my Storygraph catalog. And in my all-time stats, in my all-time genres, according to the ones that I entered online, all-time, my fourth favorite all-time genre was sci-fi. So see, sci-fi was there in the background, but it was more in the background. My overall sci-fi on Storygraph is 18%. And then the fifth genre, according to my all-time reading on Storygraph, is romance at 13% all-time reading. So I thought that was interesting, that definitely sci-fi has shot up and romance has come to feature more, but they were just below the surface in my all-time. So I thought that was interesting to see that they were trying to edge up, and now they are fully in the top three. How the top three will change over the years, I don't know, because I do believe that we grow and change and have different seasons of reading, and so it'll be interesting if I continue over many years to track my reading to see what comes in and out of my all-time genres, of my top three genres. Now, one more stat thing, and I got this from my spreadsheets. My average star rating in 2020 of the 32 books that I read that year, my average star rating out of 5, I use a 5-star scale, was 4.11 average in 2020. And in 2021, I read 61 books, and my average star rating was 4.07. So that's not a big difference at all. And definitely, I give more 4-star. 4-star is like my go-to rating for a really enjoyable, really solid quality book. 4-star, and I give 4 stars more than I give any other star rating. I think I read 62 books in 2021. I gave 31 4-star ratings. So you see, 4-star is huge. Yeah, but I do give other ratings too. I do give 5-star, and those are generally favorite books most of the times. Reading and rating and reviewing is so subjective, and we all have our different things that we want from books and different reasons why we read and different preferences of the kind of stories and the kind of characters and the kind of prose that we enjoy. Yeah. Now, let's talk about some favorites, or favorite books and favorite authors. This is a list of 7 books, not in ranked. They are not ranked. I could not bring myself to put them in order. But these are 7 out of the 61 books that were really, really top for me. Very special reads, very meaningful to me. And some of them you've already seen in my opening shot. And not all of them, but some of them you've already seen in my stack. But here we go. My top 7 2021 reads: Folklorn by Angela Mi-Young-her, The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, Circe by Madeline Miller, The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, The Snow Queen by Joan D. Vinge, and The Dearly Beloved by Kara Wall. Yeah, these were really great reads for me. I think one of them is more of a personal favorite, and I really love it for very personal reasons. Although the prose was also really lovely, and it is very well written. And that is The Dearly Beloved by Kara Wall. It's a lot different than the other 6 in that list. The other 6 are kind of from my genre preferences, things that you would not be surprised by. But The Dearly Beloved by Kara Wall is very different from the other 6, and I really love it for very personal reasons. I would call it a literary historical fiction, which I do enjoy some of, but it's not my go-to. And just the topic is faith, and as someone coming from being raised in a conservative Christian church background and wrestling with questions of faith, and I've really been examining my beliefs and my own faith and kind of going on a journey with that. And I think some of my thoughts about faith have changed a whole lot. And that really was what that book was kind of all about. And so it really hit me very, very personal to my experience and my journey that I've been going on with my own beliefs. And yeah. But the others, I think, kind of really speak for themselves. And there's magical realism, there's mythology, there's sci-fi. There is one other literary fiction that's not speculative in any way, and that is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. And that was a really beautiful book, and really just beautifully written, and beautiful historical fiction, and beautiful family Yeah. So that is another literary one in the top 7. Um, and it examines race, and it's set, it's 2 generations. So it looks at 2 sisters and then their 2 daughters. And it talks about racism and the passing, if you're, you know, people of color that have light skin and light enough skin that they can pass themselves as white and kind of leave behind, at least publicly and in their, you know, um, public identity, separate themselves from their heritage. So it was just achingly beautiful and complex. Like, it did not simplify and give easy answers, and the characters were really complex. But all of these books were really, really special books to me. And yeah. And there are some exciting authors that I read for the first time in 2021. So they are not debut authors, but they are authors that I read myself for the first time. I got introduced to some really wonderful authors this year. And here are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I made a list of 6 authors that I read for the first time, and I definitely will be reading more and more from them. Some of them I'm already preemptively counting them as favorite authors, because I believe they really will. The more that I read from them, the more I love them. That's what I expect. But N.K. Jemisin, and she wrote one of my top 7 books, the 5th season, and I'm so excited. In 2022, I want to continue that series, the Broken Earth trilogy. Another author that I read for the first time that was in my top 7 reads is Madeline Miller. She wrote Circe, which is a Greek mythology retelling, and blew me away. Blew me away completely. That book is just so amazing. And Joan D. Vinge was also in my top 7 reads. And the first book that I've ever read from her, she wrote The Snow Queen, which is a classic sci-fi space opera. It is a series. It's the start of a series. But I would say that The Snow Queen also can be a standalone. I think you can be perfectly satisfied reading it as a standalone if you don't feel like doing a whole series. And then some other authors that I read for the first time that were not in the top 7 reads, but blew me away with the first book that I read from them, and I definitely am excited to read so much more from P. Djeli Clark. I especially really love his way with novellas and short stories. I read a short story, a novella, and a full-length novel in the Cairo series. It's not called the Cairo series, but that's where it's set. his short fiction is so fabulous, and what he can do in a small page count just is wonderful. And his way with characters, even though you don't in the pages that you don't get to spend tons of time with them, he really gives you an immersive feel in a short time, and really gives you a sense of the character very, very quickly. And his writing, his descriptions are so vivid and wonderful. I have a novella, Ring Shout, I'm so excited to read. I hope I read it in 2022. But another author that I'm surprised did not make it into my top 7 list. And I thought about it when I was making the list. I'm like, really? Is that not going to be on the list? And I felt like, no. And not that I didn't love her books. I read 2 Robin Hobb books in 2021. And I do think she is a favorite author. And I was kind of shocked. I really didn't feel the urge to put the Farseer book, at least one of the Farseer books, on that top reads list. But for me, the 2 books that I've read in the Farseer trilogy, it's almost like with her series writing, it's like the whole is greater than the individual books. What makes Robin Hobb so special for me, her prose is good. Her prose is good. But for me, the super special thing is how Robin Hobb writes characters. Her characters come to life in my head. I feel like they are real people in my head. And that is my favorite thing about Robin Hobb. The last of the 6 very exciting authors that I read for the first time in 2021 is Erin Morgenstern. I read The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, and I also debated in my head, oh wait, no, that did get in the top 7. I missed that. Erin Morgenstern was in my top 7 reads. She wrote The Starless Sea. It's right there in the top 7 list. So yeah, The Starless Sea was just a highlight and a very special read for me. I know it is not a book that everyone loves, and I understand why. I have heard people talk about what they don't like, and they're not wrong. The things that I've heard people say about it that were not good for them, I don't disagree with. It is really all about atmosphere and poetic, lyrical prose. The plot gets convoluted, and the plot is, you get kind of lost in all the nested stories. It's true, but that did not bother me. I know there are other readers that is a deal breaker, but for me, I still loved it, and I was not bothered. I was not bothered in the least by that. And I was just immersed and overwhelmed by the atmosphere and the lyrical prose and the images. And then I love nested stories. And even when they get like really a little bit lost and meandering, and you're just like, where did we start? I don't know. I didn't care. I was just happy to be there. I was happy to be there in the story, in that world. I was happy to just soak it all in. That is my review of 2020, my 2021 in reading. And I hope you enjoy kind of the nerdy stats and review analysis. I hope that this was interesting for you. And yeah, how do you track your reading? And do you like to do a review at the end of the year? How do you do that? What kind of review do you do for yourself at the end of a reading year? And I would love if you want to share any of your favorite books from 2021, a favorite book, or your top 3, or whatever you want to share. Any favorites, favorite titles that you want to put in the comments below the video. I would love to hear about your 2021 favorites, and anything you want to say about your year in review for reading. Yeah, let's talk about it in the comments. So I hope that you are well, and all of your family and all of your loved ones are well. And I hope that 2022 brings good things and is better than 2021. And talk to you next time. Bye-bye.